Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our webinar, which I'm delighted that Dave Bailey has joined us. So we've done a few of these webinars now, and throughout our communications, especially with clients and SMEs, what we are hearing is that there are really three things which businesses are looking for at the moment, and that would be leadership, clarity, and cash management. And you would expect that being an accountancy and CFO support business, we've covered cash management in a fair amount of detail, and there's plenty of information resources on our website, ignition.financial/COVID, and very happy to field queries from this outside of this webinar. But today, what we wanted to focus on is leadership, and I know that there are a lot of our clients and a lot of people who subscribe to our newsletters and follow us and things like that, who are leaders in startup scale-ups and SMEs generally. We have a short poll, which I think Stu is going to pop up in a minute, which would be grateful if you could please just select one of the options. As we approach week 5 of the lockdown, how are you feeling? I'll briefly introduce Dave now. So Dave Bailey is an investor and serial entrepreneur. He's had a number of startups and has some success stories, and I think fair to say, David, some bruises and war stories along the way.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Dave is also a one of London's leading founder coaches now. He focuses on supporting founders of high growth businesses who typically have venture capital investors, and helping them grow from founders into becoming CEOs of leading businesses. And that covers, I know, a variety of aspects, but leadership is a big one of the topics that you cover. I will mention your essays on Medium, which I think are excellent, and I know they get covered a lot in the national press. And your propensity to learn new languages. I think you've fluent in 5 languages.
It's a few now, and just the bit of background for the attendees. I've known Adam for nearly 20 years now, so he's seen the all the different projects. We've both been on a lot of projects along the way, so there's a few languages as well. Yeah.
Is Welsh one of them?
Oh, well, I studied Welsh until I was 14. I know 1 or 2 words, but I confess I'm not fluent. No, not at all.
Great. Okay. Right. So, Dave, should we kick off? I mean, one thing I should say is, look, we want, this is a very conversational style. It's unstructured, so we want participation. So things which are on your mind, please do ask questions. I think the way we would prefer to do it is if people raise their hand, and that is virtually raise your hand, and you can do that in the participants. If you click on the participants box, you will see in the bottom corner a raise hand button, and if we see that, then we will we'll come to you for a question, and hopefully you we'll ask you to we'll unmute you so you can ask the question. But for those of you who want to maybe ask anonymously, then there's the Q&A and chat functions as well. Dave, maybe I can kick off with a question. How are some of the founders that you're working with at the moment feeling?
That's a really good question, and asking about what are people feeling, I think can give us a real insight into how people make their decisions. But overall, what I'm seeing, maybe a third of my clients are reasonably shielded from the crisis. They just raised money, and their particular industry is in, whether it's productivity tools or fitness, are actually doing pretty well. A third are coping. They're using the furlough program. Yep. So some of the team are staying home and not working, and they are, they're in the midst of working this through. And then there's probably a third that are really struggling, who are really having to take some of those really tough decisions. And you mentioned, you've got leadership and you've got financial management. So that financial management piece has been a big focus over the last month or two, to really figure out what steps that they can take in order to protect their business. Although, there are some common themes that are appearing across the board. So these are themes, and maybe, some of the people on this call are going to recognize this. So weirdly, after the bank holiday, every session I had with clients, they had big sort of rings under their eyes. A lot of founders are working the weekends, they're working evenings, they work the bank holiday. The level of stress has gone up. There's a persistent anxiety about what's really going on in the business now that obviously we've just gone from working in offices to working at home. So there's a lot less transparency. And, there's a great quote by Marie Kondo, if you're into tidying up, but she says, anxiety comes from not seeing the full picture. And that really resonated with me. And I think that's fueling a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fatigue. I mean, we've, for a number of reasons, we're doing more video calls. And video calls are draining in a way that face-to-face isn't as much. And there's a number of reasons why we're doing more meetings now as well. So a lot of the members of our team are demanding more time from managers. And so a lot of my clients are just back to back with video meetings. Some of them are saying, I didn't even have a chance to go to the toilet. And we start the session with like, okay, you can take a break now, 5 minutes, go to the toilet, because it's pretty intense. So lots of emotions, and independently of whether you're doing well or you're coping or you're in a crisis, these emotional seem to be across the board. That's what I'm seeing.
I think that's fair. There's quite a lot out there about remote working, and I was chatting with some of the team yesterday, and I think there's certain levels of remote working. There's there's the beginner's guide. This is Slack. This is Zoom, and using those tools. But then there is, I'll mention him. Joe Pelissier had an excellent webinar, which we'll probably go into a bit more detail next week. But it's on not trying to replicate the office environment virtually at home, and the Zoom meetings are, as you say, having a drain on people, and it's kind of getting through the cycle of recognizing that and saying, right, look, things are different here. We need to recognize that perhaps people can be we've got great people in our teams. We can trust them. They've got children. Some of them prefer to work in the evenings. They might have to go and do some exercise, and actually maybe setting some examples around that as leaders. Is that what some of your clients are doing at the moment?
Yeah. So on one level, I work with tech companies that are venture backed. They're all used to using Zoom or Hangouts. They're used to using Slack. But what's changed, I think, is that this, the change from going from the office into a remote working environment, it can really exacerbate either if there's any kind of lack of clarity over what objectives are, how they're measured, how they're communicated in terms of status update meetings. It can exacerbate a lack of kind of a meeting operating system that allows you to capture a lot of the things that would otherwise happen organically. So, I mean, no one's passing people and asking short questions at the desk. They're not overhearing conversations. They're not, aggregating in the snack room and talking and socializing. And so a lot of that is missing. And that's, that adds to this, this kind of different dynamic that we're all kind of wrestling with. I mean, one thing I'm going to state the obvious here, but sometimes it needs to be stated. The chance of you getting legitimate feedback from your team has never been lower. I mean, if you give negative feedback right now, the stakes are you might lose your job. I mean, and I've seen this. I've seen a little bit of a blind spot in leaders that is always there. Usually this kind of like power dynamic has always been there. But now, the stakes seem to be so high that, people in companies across the place are kind of sitting on feedback. if there aren't formal feedback channels and safe feedback channels, it's just not going to happen. So I think we're seeing a lot of that play out as well.
So,
Just to support, this remote is challenging.
so that's an interesting point, because the leaders that you're working with, they've got quite a well, I always think it's a really tough stakeholder group of stakeholders to manage and to lead, because even though they're early stage businesses, only if some of them are only 2-3 years old, they've got very sophisticated investors, be it professional investors like venture capitalists, or high net worth, very sophisticated, experienced businessmen and women. You've got some extremely bright and talented technologists or scientists or marketeers or salespeople in the teams. Now, how do the founders you're working with cope with managing the message? Who are the people that they are going to for support when they need a bit of support, other than yourself, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, I haven't heard too many stories. Well, the investors that I speak to regularly, they're all focusing primarily on supporting their founders. So there's a lot of additional support, and I think I've certainly experienced a sense that this was a little bit threatening, a little bit strange, but overall quite helpful. So certainly, I think there is support available, but we've gone from from whatever the old looked like for you way of living to a new way of living, and it's easy to forget that the routines that we had were sort of developed through an evolutionary process in which we figured out what worked for us.
Yeah.
So we knew, and a lot of them were we may have taken it for granted, whether it was that time you had on your commute, going out for a pret at lunch, or whatever you like to eat at lunch, and going to your gym class or whatever it might be. We have a lot of that. We had a lot of wisdom in our routines that we may or may not have been aware of, and our new routines are very different. They're really different. So there's definitely been a moment where I've asked a question like, what are 3 things that you do to manage stress? And people tend to have a really quick answer to that question. They know, yeah, this is what I do. So for me, it's pretty simple. I need to eat well, need to sleep well, I need to do my exercise. That's it. But then you're like, so how much of that are you doing now?
Yeah.
Well, I know I should be doing this. I know I should be doing the meditation or the journaling or whatever it might be. And so, of course, that putting your own gas mask on is very important. And having someone to talk to. I mean, obviously, the media, the situation is pumping out a lot of fear. And hands up who doesn't relate to having an awful day at work and then coming home and being a bit irritable with your friend or your spouse or your partner. And the opposite's happening now. We're scared as shit outside of work, and we're going into the office. And I'm seeing, again, across the board, an increase in hostility between teams, new conflicts breaking out. And the answer isn't, it might not be that, it might not be just what's at hand. I think emotions are leaky. They blend from one situation into the other. So again, as leaders, I think if you can figure out what it takes to actually put your own gas mask on and manage and regulate your own emotions, that's sort of step 1 in order to lead through a crisis.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think yesterday I woke up pretty frustrated. I managed to kind of hold it together for the brief morning call, and then I thought I've got to do something. So I went and did a virtual boot camp at 10 to 11, and
nice.
I was like, well, it did help. I think you touched on a point earlier, which is that I think white space. I mean, one of our advisors, he was hiring for a CEO of a big, he's on the board of a FTSE 100 company, and he was hiring. They were looking at CEOs, and he has one question that he asks, and he said, how much white space do you have in your diary?
Yeah.
Which I think is an excellent question. And he wants to see his CEOs having at least spread across a week about a day of white space where they either they go walk the floor, they speak to employees that they might not be normally speak to, they shut the door, they read, whatever it is that they do, just to get some white space. And it sounds like a lot of the founders and leaders that you're working with, that's almost evaporating at the moment.
It is. And you know what? A typical first session that I'll have with the CEO will address some of these like baseline ideas, like, carving in time in your calendar into your daily routine or your calendar
Yeah.
that's either thinking time, deep work time, proactive time. That's kind of, and you're right. In the switch from like the office to the home, that that discipline around keeping time separate to think and digest and be strategic,
Yeah.
we all need a bit of a reminder sometimes to do that. The other thing is, if you don't have a very clear list of priorities, if you don't really if you have a long list, and we all have long lists at the moment, if you can't actually clarify what are your top 3 priorities and actually look at the rest and say these can wait, then you risk, just being fully reactive and trying to do everything. So again, we as human beings, I think we all need someone on our shoulder, either figuratively or literally, just asking us, what are you trying to achieve? What is most important right now?
Yeah.
And just that question alone can kind of break us into, okay, there's 1 or 2 things that really matter right now, and all the rest can wait. And again, if you've got a higher workload, that means you need to be even more ruthless with your prioritization. So, I completely agree. Build in time into your working week to be strategic, to be proactive, but know exactly what that means. What is most important right now?
I can see we've got a question from Joe. Joe.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah. Hi there. This is interesting what we were talking about when we were talking about stress and anxiety. And my question was, if you are a leader of an organization or a team, how important is it for you to be open about how you feel about it, or whether you should be maintaining this strong facade in order to inspire other people?
Yes. Is it better to, spill the beans and reveal everything, or look like a robot? I think there's probably somewhere in the middle. So I had a really good rule of thumb from a yoga teacher. So I don't know if we've got any yogis in the audience, but there are some forms of yoga. I'm thinking about yin yoga that require you to hold these long positions. And apparently, I haven't done yin yoga, people spontaneously burst into tears. It's a very emotional form of yoga. But I was speaking with the yoga instructor, and apparently the rule of thumb is this: if you have a grip on your own emotions, if you can talk about them succinctly and you're okay with it, you've accepted them, then it's fine to talk about them. If you haven't got a grip on your emotions and just talking about them, you need a few minutes to kind of really think it through out loud, that's probably something you should do away from the team. So I do think there's a bit of extra work to actually check in, and actually label the emotions. There's a great piece of neurobiological research that actually says if you label negative emotion, it actually decreases its power. It becomes, it has less grip on you. So just by saying, this is anxiety, or this is disappointment, that can weaken the grip. And similarly, if you find positive emotions, you label them, it actually reinforces them. So there's a nice little psychological defense mechanism that you can use to your advantage by actually being open about it. And I do think that it is important to share, again, once you've got a grip on how you're feeling, to share it with the team. And my rule of thumb here is to link your vulnerability with the vision of your company. I think vulnerability is a great setup. Vulnerability is what? I'm feeling scared. I don't have all the answers and I need help. And the vision is, and here's why now is so important, that we keep going, that we realize our mission, that we achieve our vision, whatever it might be. So again, I think it's fine. Process the emotions first and then link it to what you're trying to do. And you don't have to have all the answers, and you can't do everything alone.
And is that also connected with the idea, if you're leading, to be very in tune with how your senior members are actually feeling and actually having the one-to-one with them? And the reason I mention this, I got a friend who's a managing director of an organization. They had to furlough 50 people. He had to recently.
Wow.
And he said, and his wife lives in Spain. And he suddenly said to me, and he was fine with this. He said, my boss has never once asked me how I'm feeling and how I'm getting on with this.
Yeah, I think there's a whole group of people who would just rather forget, imagine feelings and emotions didn't exist, or maybe they think that it has no place in the office. But the problem is, if you don't clarify and get the feelings out in the open, they're all operating in the background anyway.
Yeah.
They're all influencing our decisions. They're there anyway. So I think whether you do this in one-on-ones or group retrospectives, or if you have any kind of support structures in the organization, mentorship programs and so forth, I think now's a great time to bring this up. And a lot of people are worried that they're going to become sort of professional counselors and shrinks and psychologists, but it's actually, you don't have to solve the emotional problems, but because listening alone, it will resolve at least sort of 75%. Just hearing people out, maybe playing it back, and then helping them shift to to focus on the positives, to be grateful, that sort of thing. That's kind of enough. I think. But one thing I would say is having some forum right now, whether it's a weekly retro, to make it easy for people to come and say what's going well. Like, hey, here are my successes. Here's what I'm excited about, what I'm grateful for, what I'm proud of. And then giving people a forum to say, here's what's bringing me down. Just that alone, as a kind of collective group vent, can be very powerful. I've seen that being very powerful in and out of crisis. But if you don't already do retrospectives as a leadership team, now's a great time to try it out. And it can be very, when you feel listened to and fully understood, it can be very, very motivating.
Great, thanks, Dave.
And just on that, Dave, what kind of frequency would you advise? Is it structured? Is it ad hoc? Is it part of weekly leadership team meetings, or what's the thoughts there?
Frequency of retros, or frequency?
Retros.
Yeah. Look, there are lots of ways to approach that problem, probably more than people think. I mean, there's a whole group. I hear very often, Dave, we do retros. We do them every quarter. We kind of check in with people every quarter with our as part of this OKR process. We'll check in and see how people are feeling. I think that's way too short. I think it should be kind of weekly, bi-weekly, for maybe 30 to 60 minutes to get the people around the table and just check in. What's bringing you up? What's bringing you down? And let's all listen to each other for a bit. A retro is not a problem solving session. It's a listening session. And, we pay a lot of lip service to listening. Half an hour every couple of weeks, an hour every couple of weeks. We're talking like 1% of your time to listen. It's not a lot, and it makes a big, big difference emotionally. So I'd say more frequently than you might think.
Okay. We've had a question in here anonymously, but I think it's fine. How important is it to plan ahead, given that we know very little about what is going to happen? How
important is it that we plan ahead? So this is an interesting question, and but it's anonymous. So let me try and tackle that. Planning is an anxiety reducing thing to do. So, I work with a lot of my clients in a strategy process. Now, strategy is about placing long-term bets for which there is no right and wrong answer. And you're really thinking about strategic choices can be very anxiety inducing, because at the end of the process, you don't know if this is the right strategy or not. Whereas planning, which tends to take place on a horizon of say 1 to 3 months, depending on how you run your planning in your company, or even 2 weeks. If you're early stage and you're doing just kind of sprint planning and you're taking 1 or 2 weeks, that can kind of start to decrease the ambiguity. You know what you're trying to achieve. So I think planning is important. It is important, and especially on the short-term horizon. We should be pretty clear on what we're trying to do in the next couple of weeks. And if you do OKRs, if you're an early stage, I recommend doing kind of a shorter than average OKR cycle, maybe 1 month, 6 weeks. I think that's really important.
Dave, sorry. just for those who may not know, OKRs.
OKRs. So OKRs stands for objective and key results. And objectives really sort of try to clarify what you are trying to achieve. And I like to simplify it further. I say, if you're in a tech startup, there's really only two objectives that you have. One is to make the team better, and two is to make customers' lives better. So objectives tend to be customer focused or team focused, and key results are how do you measure success? What are the measurements that if you do all of your plans and your initiatives in pursuit of this objective, how are you going to measure success at the end? So it might be qualitative, might be a customer survey, or it might be hard KPIs. But the idea with OKRs is if you can set the success measures and you can set an objective over a longer period of time, then you can reduce goal switching. So remember in Agile, I know a number of your clients will run Agile. That's all about reducing task switching by making clear what the plan is. Well, OKRs are about reducing goal switching. So you have the same rules of the game throughout. But yeah, so if you do OKRs on a 6-weekly or a 4-weekly or even a 3-monthly basis, I think it's useful to have them because it's going to help provide clarity over what the team are actually doing.
I think Beth Davies had her hand up. Beth, if we unmute you, do you have a question that you'd like to ask?
Beth, I think you're on mute.
Thanks. It's not Beth, actually. I'm Rachel Van Walsum. Beth's my office manager who's furloughed, but I seem to have used her login.
Okay. Hey, Beth, how you doing?
No problem.
It's actually, it's in the spirit of sharing, really, because I've got a team of 15, 6 of whom have been furloughed. I'm in the classical music business, which has been totally decimated by what's happening because there are no public gatherings. I have a plan in place now for the next 6 months to see us through. And with everyone working from home, we've been having a team catch up twice a week, just to say hello to each other, to see how everyone's feeling. It's all quite touchy-feely. And that's been going swimmingly. So today I introduced a team brainstorm to say, okay, in 6 months' time, people may or may not stop going back to concerts. Where is our business going to be? How can we monetize in an environment that we don't think will exist in the same way it does now? And that went spectacularly wrong. And I came away at my lunch break thinking, oh God, it was very unmotivated. And I realized that whilst I thought we'd been trundling along quite well, people were, the isolation is making people actually lose a feeling of vision.
Yeah.
And how to try and inspire people to still be creative in their thought process and not just think further than the sofa. I suddenly hit me between the eyeballs today and I thought, oh my God, okay, how am I going to do this now?
And this might seem like an odd question. It's Rachel, isn't it?
Yes.
Rachel. So I called you Beth even after you told me your name was Rachel. Sorry about that. So Rachel, when did you have this meeting?
The meeting was today.
Got you. And was it just a dedicated brainstorming session or
yes,
part of?
and how I brokered it, I advised everyone of it last week. I said, I'd like to instigate these meetings to brainstorm any idea that can be floated is potentially a good idea. Don't feel shy. And I was just very encouraging to get people to think out of the box. And I invited everyone. So I've had to furlough mainly our admin staff, which means that we're quite manager heavy. In theory, the managers are the more visionary side, or required to be more visionary side of the business. But I included everyone because we're now only 9 people. I wanted everyone to be involved.
Yeah.
It did just go cataclysmically wrong.
It went wrong. Yeah. This is a sort of a familiar sounding story that I'm hearing. So firstly, good brainstorms in which you're kind of building on each other's ideas. There's a certain energy. And if you look at the best practices for brainstorming, it's getting people to stand up, build on each other's ideas. There's a sort of physical element to it. that doesn't work when you're sitting down and you're in this sort of, we're literally inside the box. I mean, if I move over this way, you can't see me. So it does make things like brainstorming much more difficult. With brainstorming, it's very much a divergent thinking. And so remember, divergent thinking and strategy tends to increase anxiety. And we're now in this high anxiety status. We want some clarity, want some convergence. So I can see why brainstorming is quite hard. I can also see your point around vision. Now, vision is there's a lot of different definitions of vision, but I have a very simplified, more practical definition, which is vision is really looking at the trends today and extrapolating them forward to figure out where we're going to be tomorrow. And so, almost every company should be going back to what are they seeing happening in the world? What are the big kind of macro trends? I think there are new trends now that are going to impact our businesses, and start to really think about how these now map forward. So, and I do think this is a role that will be led by leadership, will be led by the founders, and can be a lot of people can input into this. But ultimately, it is coming back and saying, like, where is the world going now? Are we going to see less physical, music venues? Are we going to see, fewer venues in the future? Are we going to see a different business model? Who knows? But I guess this is an opportunity to look at what's happening in the world, play that forward. Good vision isn't magic. Like, it's not seeing the future. It's not guessing the future. Good vision is really looking at the world as it really is and just playing the trends out, seeing where we're going to end up. So I think that this is probably a work for leadership now, to go back to vision, look at what's happening in the world, and adapt. Where are we going to be? Where is the world going to be? And play into that new reality.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Please do keep the questions coming. I know Dave's okay for 10 minutes or so, I think.
Of course, yeah.
And you can, if you don't want to speak, you can just put them into the Q&A, type them into the Q&A box, either anonymously or using your name, but feel free to put up your hands as well. We've got one question here, which I think it would be quite interesting to hear what other participants think about this one as well. What do you think employees expect from business leaders at the moment? And, following on from that, and what do they need from them?
Yeah, well, there's a timeless question here around expectations. Expectations are really hard to set, in part because we just live in a kind of a curse of knowledge where we don't know what they don't know what we know, and so it's hard to set expectations. That's the first point. And so some of these timeless things are, they want clarity, they want direction, they want to know that they have a purpose, that they're learning new things, that they're in control of their work, and they work with good people. But I think at the moment, one of the things that people want, I'm not sure if we can give it to them, but it's some sort of reassurance. They're looking for security. They're looking for safety. They want to know that their job is safe, and they want to know how they can contribute. So I think, security and contribution, these are timeless needs, but I think you should expect this to be in the be happening in your team. There was some great research that came out of the previous crisis, and it was actually if I'm not mistaken, it was a doctor wrote this coming out of the last SARS crisis, and said, one of the best things you can do, one of the best practices in companies is give everybody a pandemic related role. Everyone in the company should have a pandemic related role, whether that's to fish out a piece of good news, or to clean the door handles, or to whatever it might be. But if everyone can contribute in some way to helping out, that can be that can be very good. But yeah, contribution and then reassurance. Probably, there's a real interesting thing that's happening at the moment where leaders are sort of overwhelmed with Zoom calls and continuously talking with people.
Yeah.
At the kind of other end of the spectrum, the kind of more junior members of the team or people deeper in the organization, they're feeling isolated. They're not this is not happening for them. They're feeling like they have less contact than before. And so this is the tough challenge. This is the kind of hard thing at the moment, is you want to be there for the team and you want to be there for yourself at the same time. And that's difficult. So, one thing that I've just stumbled across that's very helpful, might be helpful for you guys, is that before we had video conferences, we had phones, we had the phone call. And I found it quite helpful to alternate between video conferences and just audio. And there's something around audio that's kind of energy increasing. That video is a little bit less intense. So yeah, mixing it up, and then and trying to give your team the FaceTime and the connection that they might be lacking right now.
Okay, Abby's written in the chat, I think it's in relation to this question, that employees will look for honesty and transparency, and that they will trust leaders who explain the journey to them and the efforts you're going to understand the challenges. I think I'd agree with that.
I love that. And and unless you do employ child workers, you have a team of adults, right? And I think people want to be treated like an adult in the situation. Everybody knows what's going on because we're all watching the news, we're all having the same conversations. So I think we just want to be treated like adults and given the blunt truth when it's time.
It's interesting. Boris Johnson was quite criticised for his insensitivity when he came out with the phrase. I think you know what I'm going to say. He said, "Look, no. I want to level with you. We are going to lose loved ones before our time." And he was criticised in some quarters for being insensitive, but maybe his honesty and transparency was misplaced at that particular time, because I think I'm right in saying that he was the only Western leader to say things like that. And you can contrast him with a number of others. One immediately springs to mind in how he likes to get his messages across, and it doesn't seem like it's totally transparent.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because honesty is an interesting word, isn't it? Because honesty, if you define honesty as saying what you really think, then this kind of idea of authenticity that can lead you into problems, right? Like famously, Alain de Botton from School of Life says, at some point in every relationship, you have a choice. Do you want a relationship or do you want to be honest? So I think that there needs to be some filter. There needs to be some filter, and you got to read the room, which is again very hard when you're kind of when you're in a video chat with no faces. But I think it's around being sensitive, being clear, and sort of having worked through the emotional stuff previously, and giving a bit of vulnerability, showing a bit of vulnerability when you make these hard messages. But it's not easy, and I think compassion is sort of the name of the game right now. Yeah. As and maybe just another helpful idea. Empathy is the process of feeling other people's emotions. And if you've ever trained as a psychologist or a therapist, a counselor, empathy is not your friend necessarily, because if you're a grief counselor and you empathize with every one of your clients, you're going to be burnt out after one day for sure. And so the little reframe here is compassion allows you to care for people, to identify with what they are going through without necessarily stepping into their pain. And I think as leaders right now, we want compassion. We don't necessarily want our leaders to feel our pain. We want them to recognize that we're suffering, but actually still make the rational decisions and keep the ship on course, and make the tough decisions without basically burning out themselves. That's been a helpful reframe for me in terms of thinking about how much empathy should I have with the people around me versus compassion. And compassion seems to be helpful at the moment.
It seems to be pretty widespread throughout our society at the moment, which I think is one of the positives that we can take out from all of this.
Yeah.
I think spot on. Compassion is the number one takeaway that, or number one thing that leaders need to be considering at the moment. Are there any others perhaps that, that people on this call might want, one or two might want to think about and take away from this, that you're seeing from the people that you're speaking to?
Yeah, I think ultimately one of the most underestimated tools that leaders have is just asking questions. Just asking questions can really help people find their own clarity, find their own solutions, understand their own emotions, understand how those emotions affect themselves. So, whether it's just making space to ask people, what's important to them, what are their goals right now, what are they trying to achieve, how are they feeling? These are questions that will help. I mean, I think we all need someone to just ask us, what are you trying to achieve right here? What is it you're really trying to do here? And that's true from the CEO all the way down to the people at the bottom. We can always get distracted from what's important. So just being generous with your questions, being generous with your ears and listening and helping people work through their own problems. Again, as leaders, we don't need to solve everything.
Yeah.
But if we ask the right questions and keep people attuned to what's important, then I think that's the first step, isn't it, to getting back to normal.
Certainly, listening, I think, is a good place to start, rather than trying to solve problems, which I know I am not the best exponent of.
Right. Yeah.
Dave, thank you so much for your time this afternoon, and it's been really insightful. I've really enjoyed it. I know all the participants have as well. Thank you very much. We'll send a follow up to everyone with your contact details.
Brilliant.
And how to get in touch if they want to speak with you or have any questions further to that. Next week, we are going to have a webinar on remote working, and I would say it's on going from intermediate level up to kind of mastering it and really making it work for your business. So it's not going to be around using basic tools. It's around recognizing what behaviors that you may be bringing in kind of subconsciously, which don't work at all, in like trying to replicate the office basically in a virtual or a flexible working environment, and looking at things like asynchronous working. It's that's going to be with Joe Plissier, who asked the question earlier, and I think that'd be a good topic as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.